Welcome back to the Wandering Star Farmhouse. My name is Jeanette, and today I am going to tell you how to beat the system and get free food. See, the system has told us for a long time that we should go and buy things from them, from the grocery store, that we can actually provide for ourselves for free here in our very own kitchen. So today we're gonna be going through things like bacon grease, other meat fats, and meat juices, and bones, and vegetable scraps, and potato water, and all the good things that you can access. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use these items to replace a lot of things that you might be buying from the grocery store right now that you actually don't need to buy because you can make them for free. Did I just say bacon grease? Yes, I did. Give me a minute to pull you more onto the idea of bacon grease. But first, I'm going to start by telling you that I like to start my bacon in kind of a cooler pan and let it slowly heat up, and that helps to render a lot of the grease out of the bacon. Now, remember that it is the food processing system that has taught you to think bacon grease is weird. I really love a lot of Michael Pollan's writings, and in the book In Defense of Food, he talks about how we as a culture went from eating a lot of animal fats to replacing those with other quote-unquote clean fats or quote-unquote healthier fats. His grandmother raised his mom on traditional Jewish American fare, but that his mom, growing up in more of a cosmopolitan society, he says she cooked with Crisco or Wesson oil rather than chicken or duck fat, and used margarine rather than butter because she'd absorbed the nutritional orthodoxy of the time, which held that these more up-to-date fats were better for our health. Official scientific opinion, which beginning in the 60s decided animal fat was a deadly substance. And then there were the food manufacturers, which stood to make very little money from my grandmother's cooking because she was doing so much of it from scratch, up to and including rendering her own cooking fats, which is what we're doing here with our bacon today. He goes into a lot of detail debunking the lipid hypothesis, which was the hypothesis that chronic disease was linked to dietary fat intake. During the decades in the 20th century when rates of heart disease were rising in America, Americans were actually reducing their intake of animal fats. That's enough talking about why bacon and all the animal fats that we're going to be looking at today are actually not bad for you like we have been led to believe for decades, but are part of this traditional diet that is healthful and nutritious and, might I add, delicious. So what do we do with bacon grease? I think typically the number one favorite use for bacon grease is to cook eggs in it. It's like bacon and eggs were made to go together or something. So we cook our fried eggs, we cook our scrambled eggs with bacon grease. But bacon grease has a lot of flavor to add to things. And so I love to use bacon grease to saute a mirepoix, when that's my vegetables of carrots, onions, and celery, when I'm going to be making a soup or something like that. It gives you the lubrication on the pan that you need so that the vegetables don't stick and burn, but it also adds a lot of flavor as well. Now, moving beyond just fat, some cuts of meat are going to release juices as well as fat when they are cooking. So for example, this is a pork loin that I cooked in the crock pot. I maybe should have given it a little browning first before I cooked it in the crock pot, but you live and you learn. Here's the jar of juices and fats that were left in the bottom of the crock pot when I was done cooking this roast. And this is just pure pork broth, and I can use it for anything. I am making some risotto for dinner tonight, and risotto takes usually about 4 cups of broth. I have some broth here I've been adding from some chicken that Jeremy roasted earlier this week. It's not quite enough broth, so I'm just adding some more pork broth. It's high in protein and gelatin and collagens. It's gonna make delicious risotto. I'm making carrot risotto. I've got shredded carrots back here, Parmesan cheese, and some more butter to add to it. I do not need all the fat that is on top of this pork broth for this recipe today. So because it's been in the fridge, it has solidified up, and I can just kind of pop it out of there. And then I can put this in another container and save it for later use. Wash it off with cold water to get all the broth off, but not melt the fat, and save it for later. This pork broth can be used for a lot of other things. You can add it into any other soups or things that you're making like that. One of my favorite things that I'll do with pork broths, I will use it for the cooking phase of dry beans. So I soak the beans in water first,
and then drain out that soaking water. And then when I'm adding more water to actually cook the beans, that's when I'll add in this leftover pork broth. And then if you're going to do something like take those beans and make refried beans, that would be one good opportunity for using some of that pork fat that you've saved.
Risotto takes about 40 minutes to make. I usually stir and then take a break, and stir and take a break. Each time it's absorbed all the broth, then I'm gonna add more. Now that the rice is soft, I'm adding in the last bit of butter and the cheese.
When I brown some ground beef, I will do the same thing. Pour the juices and the fats into a container, keep them in the fridge, and find useful applications for them. Another time you end up with a lot of awesome meat juices and fats is when you roast a turkey. This turkey may look a little weird. That's because when we were processing this turkey, we just decided to skin it because it's way easier than plucking the whole thing. And it probably was like last November and we were super cold and it was like a miserable day to be outside or something. So we just got lazy and skinned the whole thing. We've got a ton of good stuff in the bottom of here. Now, based on experience, I add water into the bottom of my roasting pan before I cook the turkey in order to prevent these juices from burning on the bottom of the pan because it's like such a wide pan. So you may have to experiment with that type of thing.
Okay, this was a really fatty homegrown turkey. So you can see in this one, that is all fat and that's a little bit of juice down here. And here, this is fat and this is juice.
Okay, so let's talk about how to make delicious homemade turkey gravy from scratch. First, we need some of the fat, and I'm gonna go with probably a 1/4 cup. And you let these juices sit here for a minute and that fat rises to the top. And now I'm going to collect as much fat as I want off the top and put it in the pan. And then anything that's left over, any more of that fat layer, I'm just gonna scoop that off and put it into the other container I have to use later. Because what I really want is a good amount of this turkey juice, turkey broth at the bottom of the jar. So now what I want is basically an equal amount of flour and the fat, and I'm gonna stir those together over the heat. This ended up a little bit thinner than I wanted, so I'm just gonna add a little bit more flour to make it more pasty. We let that come to a boil, and then we're gonna start adding in the juices. Now, it's important here to avoid the dreaded lumpy gravy. We're only gonna add in the juices a little bit at a time. So maybe like a 1/2 cup at a time or something. And each time in between adding in some more of the liquid, then we're gonna stir it till it's all the way incorporated. And this is gonna prevent the gravy from like getting lumpy at all. Because you see how every time I add in the liquid, it just like seizes up and gets all clumpy for a minute till you smooth it all out again. Also, I don't quite have as much liquid as I want because to that 1/4 cup of fat and 1/4 cup of flour, I'm gonna want it to make about a quart of gravy, about 4 cups of gravy. So I need to add more water at this point. I'm not concerned about the flavor of the water being plain because I know that the juices from the bottom of this pan are so concentrated that this gravy is gonna be so tasty, even though I'm kind of thinning it out with water till I get it to the good consistency I want. Also, I'm not going to be adding any extra salt to this because we brine our turkeys, and so the juices are very salty. But if you don't brine your turkey, you're going to need to add a decent amount of salt to this, and we do add some freshly cracked pepper. And what you end up with is something way better than you could ever get out of a powdered packet. All right, next step, we're starting to actually include the bone as well. So here is a ham bone left over from Easter. And this is actually this ham bone beans video. I'll put the whole thing here basically, but this is my second most popular video ever on my whole channel. It's the second most viewed video. And it's really super simple. Lots of people take this bone and just throw it away, but there is so much goodness left in the bone and in that meat that's on the bone. So we're gonna take that whole bone and throw it in with our pot of dry beans. Add your ham bone to a 5 or a 6 quart Dutch oven, then add in the beans. I'm also going to add this jar of juices that were left over in the pan after I cooked my ham. I will even add in the layer of fat on the top. That will really add positively to the mouthfeel of this type of a dish. Next, I'll slice an onion into small dices. If you want a printable copy of this recipe, make sure and check out the link in the description to my blog, wanderingstarfarmhouse.com. And I'll mince a clove of garlic. Add those on top of the pot and then fill the pot with water to cover the beans. My husband really likes things spicy, so if you're like him, you can add a diced jalapeno at this point. I want to make sure all my beans are underwater so they can get cooking. Then I'm going to set the Dutch oven on a medium heat. Cover it with the lid and leave it. I'll come back and check on the pot periodically and make sure that the beans are still covered with water. With a Dutch oven this size, I may need to add water once or twice while the beans are cooking. After a few hours, all the little ham pieces have cooked and separated from the hand bone. So at this point, you can take out those pieces of ham and chop them. Also remove the ham bone at this point. I like to chop this ham nice and small so that when I mix it in, there's bits of ham all through the beans.
Now, continuing down our line of complexity, the last thing that we're gonna do here is with the fat, the juices, the bones, the skin, we're gonna make broth out of this. But the excellent thing about broth is it uses not only these meat and bone scraps, but it also is an excellent use for a lot of vegetable scraps as well. So when you're chopping the ends off of carrots, celery, onion, even onion skins, all of those things can go into broth and make it super delicious. Okay, here is another example of broth making with some beef bones that I had. And so what you do is you're just gonna bring this to a boil and let it cook for like hours, multiple hours. Sometimes people add a little bit of vinegar in there too to help draw some of the minerals out of the bones as well. But after it's cooked for a handful of hours, then we strain it all out to strain out the vegetables and the bones, and then ladle that into jars. And the jars, they can either be pressure canned, or you can put them into freezer containers and you can freeze the broth, or put them into jars and store them in your fridge for a week. And then we use this broth for all kinds of things. We eat a lot of chilies and soups through the fall and winter. It's great, cozy, comforting, and nutritious food. And the base of that soup and chili is coming from the delicious homemade broth that you made from scraps from your kitchen. Okay, now this last one is a little bit of a bonus. It is potato water, which potato water just is something most people pour down the drain. But if you keep it, it's not necessarily replacing something else in your kitchen, but it is just adding a lot. You can use this to thicken your gravies instead of some of the flour. You can use this to add some more body to your soups. And one popular thing to do with potato water is to make bread and rolls with it, because the potato starch in it acts as this dough enhancer that really lets you get fluffy, soft bread. So today I am using a recipe from King Arthur flour. I'll link it down in the description. And it is for potato rolls made with potato water. Now these rolls have a couple of dough enhancers in them. There's potato water, egg, butter, and powdered milk all help you have really fluffy rolls. I am modifying this recipe just a little bit. I am doing half home ground whole wheat flour instead of all purpose flour. But this potato water is going to help us end up with super fluffy, delicious rolls regardless. One trick with your bread and rolls is to just make sure you give it enough time to rise. You need it to be nice and fluffy for the first rise and the second rise. And especially when we get into this time of year, when it's starting to cool down and your kitchen's maybe getting colder than it has in the past, you really need to make sure that you give it enough time to fully rise before moving on to the next step. Other thing that helps you get a good rise in your rolls and bread is to have a nice tight skin when they are rising. This is the way my friend taught me how to do it. Kind of make a C with my left hand, push the dough through with my right hand so that it's pulling the outside of the dough tight, and then pinch the bottom together and put that pinch side down in the pan.
I hope you enjoyed today's video of how you can beat the system and really get more out of your kitchen and more out of your food than a lot of people do. And you can skip those lines at the grocery store and provide these things at home for yourself for free. Please hit that subscribe button and I'll see you on the next video.